If you are a regular listener of this show, you may have heard me mention that I'm starting a new group for my online teacher training in January. And I'm mentioning it again here because I want to make sure folks know that we are offering early bird pricing for a limited time. If you register before October 1st, you get 50% off. And if you've been listening to the show and you feel like you learned something from it, or you connect with me and how I engage in these conversations about yoga, and you feel like you want to make a deeper commitment to your own personal inquiry into yoga, or perhaps you have interest in becoming a teacher, or maybe you're already a teacher and you just need some new information, then this is an opportunity for us to come together in a way that I'm feeling really good about. I feel like I finally got a handle on these online tools and developed a program that allows me to stay true to the pedagogy that I align with. It's a year-long program, and it's co-creative. It fits to your needs more than you have to fit to it. And as I mentioned, we are offering early bird pricing, and if you register before October 1st, you can get 50% off. To learn more about the program and register, go to jbrownyoga.com/training. That's jbrownyoga.com/training. All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. What's going on? Welcome if you're new. Thanks to everyone for being here. First things first, for those who were here last week, especially anyone who sent me a note of well wishes, I want to give you an update on how my daughter Annabelle's return to school was this week. I am happy to report that it couldn't have gone any better. I mean, we were worried that the return to school would mean a return to some of the things that were happening at the end of last year, but that was not the case. In fact, it had a reverse effect. It seemed to have a very positive effect on her. She has a fantastic teacher. She's wonderful, and she's already made a lovely and deep connection with her, even within the first few days. And she just has been feeling comfortable and having play dates with her friends every day. And she went to bed at a reasonable hour and she got up on time. And there's still some behavioral things happening that are concerning. So I'm certainly not counting any chickens, but it was a good week. And I know that there are some of you out there who, after hearing me talk about it last week, thought for a moment, I hope it goes well for Jay and Annabelle. And some of you, I think, included Annabelle and me in your prayers, and they were answered. We cleared the hurdle, y'all. I'm very, very grateful. Really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And it is truly amazing how much just getting over that hurdle and being able to feel a little bit more positive about how my daughter's doing has freed me up to feel a whole lot better and to feel a whole lot more creative. Of course, it could be different tomorrow, but today we're feeling good, and that's what I'm bringing with me into this moment with you. I hope that it finds you doing okay and that you'll get some little glimmers of support and grace too. I also want to mention, because it's just kind of like a significant thing happening in my life, is I'm doing my first in-person workshop next weekend on September 10th. I'm doing a workshop for the Yoga Teacher Association of the Hudson Valley. This is a independent yoga teacher association that has existed in the Hudson Valley for many, many years. And if you're in the New York area and you want to come meet me and have some discussion and some practice in person, I'm doing that on September 10th. You can get to it through my website or theirs. feels like a big deal. It's been more than 2 years since I've done that, and I'm looking forward to it. What else? Not too much. I don't want to keep this intro too long because today's conversation is a little bit longer than some others. My guest is Sukadev Bretz. He is the founder of Yoga Vidya in Germany. And I was in contact with Sukadev years ago. As we discuss, you'll hear we were supposed to meet in person. It never happened, but things come round and round again. And we ended up hooking up a few weeks ago for this conversation. And it was really, really cool. I just connected very easily with Sukadev. And what I love so much about it is that the idea of going into a spiritual community many times these days seems to almost have like baggage around it, or like connotations where people's minds immediately go to the abuses and all the things that have happened. And yet there are many people who go to places like Yoga Vidya and their experience has nothing to do with that. In fact, having a spiritual community can be a powerful thing. And I don't know, we shouldn't be throwing babies out with bathwaters is what I'm trying to say. And my conversation with Sukadev seemed to illuminate this as it regards yoga and spiritual communities. So it was wonderful to connect with him. And I think he has a lot of insights to share. I'm very glad to be bringing that to you today. Real quick before we get to it, I do also want to express some love to our podcast premium subscribers because without those folks, this podcast boat doesn't stay above the water. And today, I specifically want to thank Alana Cameron and Stuart McGill. Shout out to you, Alana and Stuart. Really appreciate your support. If you are getting some value from this show and you want to support it or just get access to the full archives, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the way that you do that. It's choose your rate. You cancel at any time. And if you don't have any money and you want to get to an archived episode, just email us because we will give you a free account, no questions asked. But if you have a little bit of something to give, it definitely makes a difference. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber or any of my other stuff, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, like I said, I want to keep this tight and get to today's talk. I will touch base with you on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Sukadev Bretz. Hello.
Hi, Jay.
Hello, Sukadev.
Wonderful to hear you.
And to see you, or to hear you, I should say, to be with you, to have this chance for us to finally have a chance to speak.
Yes, I've been listening to your podcast for quite a few years, and I somehow feel close to you without ever having seen you.
Oh, well, for me, it's a lovely kind of demonstration of how, I don't know, things come around. We were in touch years ago. My intention was to meet you in person while I was traveling because I was going to be in Germany.
Yes.
It never happened. And then here we are now, finally having this chance to speak, not in person, but next best thing.
Yes. So it's wonderful.
Yes. And the show, so I probably don't need to say it, but just in case, I'm recording and I'd like to consider us having just begun, if that's okay with you.
Yes, it's okay. I'm aware of that.
Good. I know I wonder if I need to say it, but it's become my practice now because I've learned from things that have happened in the past that I don't want to take people by surprise who don't know.
Yes.
Well, how is it with you? How are you today?
Well, I'm quite fine. We're just having a big yoga festival in our ashram, so there's a very joyful mood, and so I'm also in good spirits.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I'm at my in-laws' place in Virginia, so I'm somewhat removed from my normal daily life identifications, which I think is one of the great benefits of the times I've been in like any kind of retreat situation.
Yes.
Is that it removes you from that. And that is the kind of appeal or the kind of, I think the benefit of like a spiritual community, right? Because in certain ways you can live life in ways you might not if you weren't in spiritual community.
Yes, that's definitely the case. But sometimes it's also good to just be with family, and suddenly you're no longer a yoga person, you're a family person.
Same thing in my view, but it depends on where you come from. It's, I guess is a good place for us to maybe begin. People listening to this might not know all the things that I've come to know about you and getting ready to talk with you. And I guess it's interesting to me because you are someone like other people I've spoken to before. I think of Nishala Devi. I think of even Doug Keller, people who entered into spiritual community at an earlier time before a lot of the world was thinking about yoga.
Yes.
And I know you entered into spiritual community, is that right? Like in 1980, I have written down. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yes, 1980. I started meditating in 1979, and then 1980, I entered in a spiritual community.
And I guess my curiosity is sort of the question I always ask people who had that similar time frame experience is you were in Germany at the time, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm curious, what was the yoga scene like in 1979 and 80 in Germany? Like, was there a lot of yoga around? And I guess my other question that connects to it is, what was it that prompted you, or what do you have some idea about what motivated you to start meditating and then go into spiritual community if that wasn't common from other people that you had a model for?
Yes. Well, it was definitely not as common as today. But in Germany, you could say there were two different streaks in the yoga movement. On one hand side, there was in the adult education centers, which in Germany are called Volkshochschule. They offered yoga classes. And so you could say in any city where they had these adult education centers, you also had yoga classes. So there were quite a few people practicing yoga. And then you also had these Indian masters like Swami Vishnudevananda, like the Hare Krishna movement or the TM movement and the Rajneesh Osho movement, who had centers. And so there was a movement in that direction as well. In fact, in the beginning of the 80s, we had like this strong feeling we could change the world, and the world would be ready, and everybody would practice yoga, meditation, spirituality, Sufism or Zen or whatever. And by the end of the 80s, we would have a new wonderful world. So it was like quite an enthusiastic mood at that time. Of course, most didn't happen in that way, but it was a wonderful time.
See, and so what was it was there like a certain event or reason that prompted you to enter into spiritual community in 1980?
Well, there were certain events which culminated in it. When I was a child, I had sometimes like visions of beings of light guiding me, and I had dreams of Jesus Christ, and I saw some light beings during the day, and somehow I knew what I was told in school and by my parents, there's more to it. Well, and then I lost it a little bit, and then when I was 13, 14 years old, I got into contact with the suffering in the world and the wars in Biafra and children dying of hunger, and I saw the pictures of what happened in the Holocaust, and I thought, is there any meaning in this world? So I was quite desperate also being a little bit shy and a little bit lonesome in school. And then I read this book of Hermann Hesse, the Steppenwolf. And then I thought, there are others who feel a little bit like me. And then I read all the books of Hermann Hesse. I read other books as well. And I read a book on karma and reincarnation and then mysticism. And so somehow, when I was 16, I thought, well, all the religions and spiritual systems say similar things. And one just has to start and realize God. So that was my opinion there. So
wise 16-year-old view.
Yes. And so I started meditating with the book, and at the same time became a vegetarian. Both where I was living was quite strange to my parents because I'm living in a rural area. And then when with 17, I went to university. At the same time, I found my spiritual community, and then I moved in, continued to study, and then when the studies were over, then I stayed in the Shivananda Yoga centers.
I see. And they had a center in Germany. Is that where
yes,
you?
They had a center in Munich, and that's where I studied.
I see. And you mentioned your family. How did they react to you deciding to go become a monk or whatever?
Well, of course, they were not very happy about it. I was supposed to get into the family business like my brothers. But in the end, my father always had said we can choose whatever we want. Because his father had basically nearly forced him to get into the family business. But of course, he would have preferred something else. But after a while, he saw, I'm still a person you can talk to, and basically I have not changed in my ways to speak, and so on. So then they accepted it. My mother actually also became a vegetarian. She also took yoga teacher's training course later. My elder brother also became a yoga teacher.
Well, there you go. See, it spread out. There were reverberations in your family.
Yes, it spread out quite good.
Interesting. And I guess, you said something earlier and it struck a chord because I mentioned I'm away at my in-laws' place and I've recorded several podcasts. So I was here. I recorded one yesterday with someone named Jeff Carrera, and he had this definition of spiritual awakening as when you come to realize that there's more to it. Like you said when you were young, and you said, oh, there's more to reality than what I'm being told or what I know. That was a sort of form of spiritual awakening, and that kind of experience kind of has an indelible mark, and then it leads you in directions. It seems like it certainly was the case for you.
Yes, that's definitely for many people who are on the spiritual path, very important. You don't get to it just intellectually, but you have some experience, and that experience is so strong, you have to follow it in some way.
Right. So, all right. So tell me about your experience of that Shivananda community in 1980. And I say 1980 because I think it was probably very different in 1980 than it was in the latter years or now,
Of course, I don't know how it is now, as I've left them in 1991.
Right.
But at that time, it was in the Munich. It was actually a small city center. There were two yoga halls, or one yoga hall and a meditation room, and we were having yoga classes and meditations every morning, satsang at 6:00. And we were 3 people sleeping in the asana hall. In the morning, we took away our mat, and in the evening, we spread our mat. And so it was very simple, but it was also enthusiastic, and it was intense.
Yeah. And it was like, was that a taking of vows, or how does that start in that at that time?
At that first, no vows, but you were there like a border, it was called. I still went to the university. I studied there, but I was in satsang and did my yoga there, and did karma yoga, so helping whatever was necessary. And I took a yoga teacher's training course, actually upstate New York in the Shivananda Yoga Ranch. And so then I started teaching. And then in 1982, then I actually took brahmacharya vows, which meant that basically preparing to become a swami, so kind of a monk later on. Mm-hmm. And then...
And does that mean going to live there, or are you still just like going to school and then going there?
Well, I was living there already since 1981.
Right.
And it basically meant to stay living there. And I still finished university in 83, and then I continued. Mm. And then in 85, I became a swami.
I see. And so when you become a swami, what are the vows that you take?
Actually, the most important... The vow, formally, it just means you give up all attachments, you abandon all desires, and you dedicate your life to finding the truth. And informally, it also means you're living a celibate life. That's basically it.
Isn't that, I mean, the first part, the formal part, is the part that appeals to like something deep in us, that the want for that, yes. To dedicate yourself to those principles.
Yes.
But then that informal part seemed to be the part that screws it up most of the time, right?
Yes. It's good. It's nice to make these vows, and afterwards you discover something comes in your mind and in your emotions and in your hormones and your whole being.
Yeah. So when you were, after you become a swami in 1985, I guess.
Yes.
What does your life change from what it was before? Now that you've got a new title, you're teaching people who come in? Are there people from outside the ashram and like regular folks just coming and doing retreats and that kind of thing while you're there?
Yeah, well, for a long time, I was in yoga centers. And the yoga center, well, there are some people who live there, other teachers who come once or twice a week and teach there. And every day, people come to the yoga center to take classes, like in any yoga studio. So there are yoga classes, and so that's basically how the yoga centers were in the 1980s, and probably not much has changed since.
Right. And there was very established kind of practice sequences, if I remember, I remember eye rolls and shavasana in between each pose.
Well,
was that from that early on, or was that something that came about later when it became more standardized or something?
Well, this strong standardization about which I'm told now, that wasn't in the beginning of the 80s. When you see the big book of Swami Vishnu, they have so many different poses. And then the center director with whom I was studying, she was also studying Alexander technique, and she had taken Iyengar yoga classes and others. And so she was a little bit experimenting, as she herself had a history of strong back problems from her childhood onwards, as she had some back deviation, and so she basically healed herself for the yoga practices, and she tried out a lot. And we had somebody who was a shiatsu teacher who also had some qigong. So there was some trying out how you can do it. And then there were pregnancy classes, yoga for your back classes, advanced classes. So there was quite a big spectrum of teaching at the time. Later on, somehow it seems to have narrowed quite a lot.
Yes. I didn't get into yoga until I'd say like 92 or 93. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it still had that, like, I don't know, wild, wild west or whatever. Things hadn't gotten quite standardized yet, but shortly thereafter, they kind of became that way more and more, it seemed, as things kind of spread out.
Yes. But what for me was also interesting at the time, I was sent from one center to the next one. So I started in Munich, 84. I went to Vienna center and directed that center. And then afterwards in Geneva, then 85, end of 85, I was sent to the Los Angeles center in Hollywood.
Oh, Leslie Kamenoff ran that one for a little while, if I recall.
Yes, that was after Leslie Kamenoff. So there were two other directors in between. But right. I met him at the time in LA.
Huh. There you go.
Yes.
I see. Well, I guess I'm curious about when you were going to these centers in the late 80s. Were you just teaching like those asana programs, or were you teaching philosophy and text and stuff as well?
Well, philosophy and text as well. We had you had different programs. You had yoga open classes, and they're just straightforward. Initial relaxation, pranayamas, surya namaskar, asanas, final relaxation, and maybe a few minutes meditation in the end. Then there were yoga courses where people sign up for a set of 5 class or the 5 weeks, and there's some yoga philosophy in it. And then there are meditation courses, and then there are yoga sutra courses and bhakti sutra courses and so on. So they were also offered, and weekend courses where then there's also satsang and so on. And of course, twice a week, there's satsang, just meaning meditation, chanting, lecture on the spiritual themes, and then Om Triambaka, meaning peace prayers, arati, light ritual. So that was in the centers. Always.
Yeah, I asked the question and because all of those things you just said, that's everything that everyone thinks of as teacher training now.
Yes.
Well, that was all just part of the programs in the centers.
Yes, that was part of the programs in the centers. And of course, then there were the 4-week yoga teachers training courses, which SYVC was and probably still is famous for. And I was also teaching a lot of these and was translating and partially teaching, partially translating. And so there you always have philosophy and rituals and mantras and hatha yoga and anatomy, physiology, everything together.
So when you say translating, you mean into German?
Into German or into French, as I also learned some French.
I see. And had there been like other people before you translating this stuff into German?
Yes. So the centers in Germany and in Austria, so Munich and Vienna, had been there since 72. And then teachers training courses were translated into German. Actually, when they were in Canada and the main headquarters, you had the teacher's training course translated simultaneously to Spanish, French, German, and Hebrew, as that was quite strong in Israel as well. That was part of the wonderful international atmosphere.
Right. As I mean, it spread.
Yes.
It spread out. All right. So then talk to me then about why you decided to depart.
Yes. Well, at some point in 87, I had a strong idea, maybe even a vision, that for yoga to become more important, there needed to be some things to be changed. One is, I valued and still value the philosophy and the spirituality and the spiritual experience. But at the same time, I thought this has to be more democratic. It has to be less autocratic, more democratic. And the concept of that most people who stay in the organization will become monks doesn't really work, as I could see so many left with their girlfriend or boyfriend, and some didn't leave but had their boy and girlfriend, and somehow I felt that's not the way it can be on long term. At some point, I tried to spread these thoughts inside the organization, and then I somehow felt it didn't lead anywhere. I was also part of the board of directors, and then I felt I have to leave. And so I left with my then girlfriend, the organization, first not knowing what to do. And so we went for traveling a bit, first to her family in the US, then to my family in Germany, then to another branch of her family in Holland and Israel. Then we went for a few months in India. While being there, our relationship broke. And then I was in Shivananda Ashram Rishikesh, which Swami Vishnu had broken away from. So I went to the mother ashram there, and there I had the vision to go back to Germany and open a center in Frankfurt. And somehow in the vision was on a long-term basis, somehow an ashram for 1,000 people would come, and a big yoga network could come into existence.
Wow. That's a lot. Well, first, it's amazing how, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, maybe, how you refer to having visions that are guiding you. And yes, I'm very intrigued by that. That's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I was just talking about yesterday in that other conversation. So things are coming around and round again. But I guess before we talk about visions, I'm curious a little bit more, before we leave your time in community and starting your own place.
Yes.
I'm curious about your relationship to your guru, or when you were a disciple of Swami Vishnudevananda. What was your first one-to-one experience with him, and what was that relationship like?
Well, my first experience was in 81 when I was in the center. He was visiting the center, and he was then very much into the peace movement. So he made us stand on our head in the big square in Munich. And he said he wants to fly over the border to Eastern Europe to set a sign for peace. And I was torn in between two things. On one hand side, I thought he's crazy. What will it help to fly into Eastern Germany? On the other hand side, I was fascinated by his charisma and his down-to-earth talk that he had. So my relationship became strong when I took ATTC, so Advanced Teachers Training course in 82 for 4 weeks. So there he was as two teachers who somehow didn't show up. Well, they left the organization before. And so he was basically teaching everything. And so I got into a very strong personal contact with him. So I had a deep devotion to him, deep connection with him. And so I felt strongly guided with him. And he also helped me a lot by pushing me. In a way, I was shy and I was timid, I was young, and he pushed me into responsibilities. He gave me self-confidence and confidence in God, and also some enthusiasm and deep meditation. Then in 88, yes, I became his personal assistant, and there I started getting some doubts, as I could see he wasn't that holy as I had thought before. I could see his human nature also, and there were a few things I thought are not right what was there, but more in the context of how decisions are made and so on. There actually I made suggestions to him to democratize everything. First he was quite interested in it, but then he decided to take another way on there. But so from then onwards, for a few years, I had this double relationship. On one hand side, I had still this devotion. On the other hand side, quite a few times I wasn't, I thought his decisions are not the right ones. And especially the way decisions are made, I didn't feel it's right.
Right. And so when you say that you saw things that were his more human side, does that also mean some of the abuses that came out later?
I did not know about the abuses at the time. There were some rumors from the 70s, but the story said, well, in the 70s, he had some affairs, and the word sexual abuse was at that time not common. But he had some affairs in the 70s, most likely. But then around 1980, he got over it. And since then, he's following his vows. That was the narrative at the time.
Right.
Then,
but something in you felt uncomfortable with when you got that close to him. You're like, wait a second.
Yes, well, he had some strong, how would you say, mood. He could get angry, and I thought he can read everybody's mind, and I could see he got angry about things where I knew they were not correct. So I still had the high devotion, but I thought something he's not as, but he never claimed to be the self-realized or a saint. He always said he's not, but then we thought, well, if he claims he's not,
that makes it, that's why he is, because he doesn't say
it. That's why he is, yes. And sometimes he asked for forgiveness, and he even prostrated in front of others. He didn't allow us to prostrate in front of him, but he prostrated in front of us and said, please forgive me, I'm a human being, and I'm hurting you by my nature.
And I guess my curiosity is, because Swami Vishnudevananda is the person in all those pictures, the black and white book that you referenced, right? The book of all the poses. Is that book what made him the distinguished person that he was, or was he already kind of like the number one student even before that book came out? Do you know?
Well, Swami Vishnudevananda was the disciple of Swami Shivananda, and he was in charge of the Hatha Yoga part in Shivananda Ashram Rishikesh. And so he was actually the one, I don't know whether you heard about Andre van Liesbeth. So he studied with Swami Vishnu and quite a few other teachers who later on taught, especially in Europe and partially also in South America or in Indonesia, Malaysia. They learned from Swami Vishnu in the Shivananda Ashram Rishikesh. But then in the end of the 1950s, he came to US. That's in 1957. He wrote this book, and I think this book was part of it what made him famous.
Interesting, very interesting.
Well, in the 60s, he was also for a few years the guru of the stars. He taught Muhammad Ali. He was in contact with Marilyn Monroe. He was teaching the huge later King of Spain and the Queen of Spain. And he was also introducing the Beatles into...
See, why would you want to democratize it when you get all of that?
Yes.
All right, well, so you leave in 1991 and you travel around a little while. Yeah. And it's funny what you said. Let's just go back to it for 1 second. And it's not so funny, but it's been my experience too. And it's what I said earlier, that informal vow of celibacy was the catch, because sometimes when you're living in community, people meet their partners and come together. You said everybody kept leaving with their girlfriends. And maybe that's not bad. Maybe you can have the principles without the attempt to, I don't know, remove from life. What do you think the vow of celibacy is about? And do you think that's important or necessary?
I definitely don't think it's necessary. In our community, we don't have that everybody has the vow of celibacy. We also have, we have 250 people living in our community. And we also have like one Swami who feels very strongly. She's now end of her 60s, and she took that vow. And then we have a few who take the vow of brahmacharya, we say for a minimum of 1 year. And for a while, it's a good thing. If you say, especially not running from one relationship to the next one, it might be good to have a few months or a little longer in between. Or if you want to get intense on the spiritual path, I think it's good to be for a while, have a celibate life. I don't think it's necessary, but for some people, it's a good time.
Well, it's different if it's self-directed and you decide to do it rather than you feel like some outside authority or guru figure who knows your soul is telling you that that's what you should do.
Yes, definitely. But in my case, it was actually Swami Vishnu initiated me into sannyas, actually without me knowing about it.
What's that? How does that happen?
Well, he was on a travel in India, and somehow the then director of the Munich center, or the director of the European centers, she talked a little bit about certain things which were there, and then he asked, do you think he would want to be a Swami? And then she said, yes, Swamiji. And then he said, okay, then you can give him sannyas in my name. And then she said, well, it's modern age. You can give the initiation. I have a tape recorder. And then when I go to Europe, I'll make him sannyas. So,
wow, I've often said that when I kind of came into it, it was like before there was a proliferation of teacher trainings. And the way that you became a yoga teacher is that you would go to class and be a consistent enough student for long enough that at some point your teacher would like turn to you and say, I have to go out of town next week. You're going to cover my classes. And that's how you became the teacher. That's how you became sannyasin. It sounds like.
Oh, yes, but yes, a little bit like that.
Wow. Well, that's interesting though, because that is different than this woman at Yoga Vidya deciding to take that vow. You had it kind of put upon you, or you kind of, do you feel there was a manipulation there?
Not from the side of Swami Vishnu, but most likely there was some manipulation from the side of the then director of the European centers. But I don't have a grudge on that. It was a good experience, and it was a strong experience, and it was important for my development. So somehow I think there was some divine guidance in it.
Yeah, it certainly gave you an opportunity to explore these deep messages or impulses from a young age, So
yes, I was just 22.
Yeah. It's that time though, those 20s, that's an important time if you can devote it. That's when I became important to me to be doing similar things, although I never was in community in that way. That's why I'm so intrigued by it.
Yes.
So I guess when you opened Yoga Vidya, was it always called Yoga Vidya? Was that the first name?
No, the first name was Yoga Center at the Zoo, because it was in Frankfurt near the zoo. And I said, well, before I lived in a zoo, now we're living next to the zoo.
All right. So it starts out as yoga at the zoo.
Yes.
And was it just a center, or from the beginning, did you have it in mind to be an ashram?
Well, first it was a center, in the sense, a city center, and it was a small center. It's 175 square meters, which probably is 1,750 square feet. And we were opening it, and we had 4 yoga rooms, and we also slept in the yoga rooms. And then, well, like in Shivananda Yoga Vedanta, we had satsang every morning, but we made it a little later. And we had yoga classes every evening, and we had yoga class in the morning. We had weekend seminars in the centers. Then a year later, we started with 2 years yoga teachers training course. And then we started having retreats in seminar houses, which we rented. Then we started in 95 our first 4 weeks teachers training course outside the center. And then it seemed the time was ripe to open the first ashram. And then in 96, then we opened the first ashram in the countryside, somewhere between Frankfurt and Cologne in a forest. So that was our first ashram first we were 6, later on we were 25 living in the community. We had a big trailer community as everybody was living in trailers. The guests had rooms where they slept, and a few single rooms, more dormitory style. And so they came for yoga vacations and yoga seminars, yoga teachers training courses, advanced yoga teachers training courses, and so on. But that was then a big adventure. How do you run a yoga ashram, which is meant to be humanistic? So this means the single individuum is important. And how do you do it democratic? You need some rules. And so we discussed every week for a few hours. Sometimes we started our discussion at 2:00 and it finished in the evening at 10:00. So we were trying to find out how we create the ideal spiritual community where everybody is happy, everybody has what they know, what they want and need, and everything should be harmonious and so on.
That's all order. Everybody's going to be happy, huh?
Yes, definitely. That was our. Of course,
well, wait. I'm curious to ask, sort of in the transition. That's a lot and I'm curious to hear more about how things developed over the years. But I'm wondering, what was your relationship to the Shivananda organization when you left and opened that place? Was it still like affiliated?
Actually, Swami Vishnudevananda, most likely he was quite disappointed from that I left.
Yeah. And, did you have a conversation with him, or did you just inform somebody else?
Basically, I informed somebody else. Yeah. But basically, at some point in the final conversation, he said, I either become a Swami again or I should leave.
And you're like, okay.
So I said, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And his secretary said, well, I should just stay a little. Swamiji would change his mind and she'll help me to change. But I decided I'll leave. And then actually, I'm grateful for him. He made the connection quite strong. So he didn't want that we sell the tapes of SYVCs or the yoga tapes with which you could do yoga, and we couldn't buy anything there, so we did out our own. Then he didn't want me to send students to the yoga teachers training course, so that was why we did our own yoga teachers training course.
Mm.
And
so even though you were, at that time, you were still like identifying with him as your teacher and that system of practice, even though he was sort of severing connections?
Yes.
Mm.
And I'm very grateful to it. Who knows? Otherwise, I might have been an affiliate center, and then 3 years ago, fall into another kind of crisis. But later, a few years later, for a while, I had good connections to the Shivananda yoga centers, because there was some German yoga federation of yoga teachers associations, and then we had some connection for a while.
I see. But you mentioned to me, I think in your email, that for a while you had like pictures of him up, but at some point you took them down.
Yes.
What prompted that? When did that happen?
But first, when I left, in the first years, there were no pictures of Swami Vishnu in the centers. But then a few years later, somehow I felt deeply connected to him again. And so we put pictures of him on the altars, and we included in the daily chants also his name. And so somehow I felt somehow his blessings is behind, even though the same way as he split with his master, Swami Vishnudevananda, he did his own organization and had nothing to do with Divine Life Society anymore. Even though he held his teacher in high esteem, the same way I can hold him in high esteem, even though Yoga Vidya is separate. Well, then in 2019, there came the sexual abuse. Things came into light, and then we had crisis meeting here, and then we decided to put away all the pictures and no longer have his name in the formal recitation. Actually, interesting enough, a few months earlier, or half a year earlier, some representative of SYVC, who I knew well, told me I should stop calling me a disciple of Swami Vishnu as I left him, and it's not, I would be a hypocrite to call myself a disciple of his. And so then I already said, well, if that's the feeling, it's better we reduce this, the Swami Vishnu in our organization.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting the way that you described how you had an example of your Swami Vishnudevananda. I don't want to call him your guru because it doesn't sound like he would necessarily be that today. He might have been that at some point for you. I don't know how you consider him now.
I'm still torn. On one hand side, I'm grateful for what I learned. On the other hand side, the woman suffered from what he did, and he did things he should not have done, and they're ethically wrong. And if somebody in our organization would do something what he did, he would be thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to, but still I learned from him. Still, of course, I integrated teachings from others, and basically Yoga Vidya, we integrate a lot of things. But I'm grateful for that, and at the same time.
So you mentioned that you had an example of Swami Vishnudevananda splitting from his teacher and kind of doing his own thing.
Yes.
And that's an interesting, because people, I guess I hadn't thought of that before. I guess I've heard that he split in some regards, but because he still, as you said, held him in that same regard, even though he split, people often talk about it as like some kind of direct thing from Shivananda to Swami Vishnudevananda to what we get at the Shivananda centers now. Yeah. And it doesn't sound like the case. It sounds like these individual teachers put their own 2 cents into things along the way quite a bit.
But definitely they do. But Swami Vishnu, his devotion to his master, to his guru, was genuine. So he felt as being an instrument. He said, if there's anything good I teach, then it's Swami Shivananda, and anything wrong I say, that's me.
Well, then why did he split from his teacher?
Well, he split from the organization.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.